Hey, welcome, folks. A lot of familiar faces, but also some new faces. So this is the Rough Cut Seminar Series being by the Institute on Ecosystems. In case you don't know, we across campus center that tries to foster collaboration among environmental scientists and engineers. Also, facilitate graduate research. And the seminar series is one way that we get to connect with each other and share ideas and learn some new things, get to know new people. This semester's theme is perspectives of scientists that are well into their careers, and it's a nice juxtaposition against the grad student led seminars last semester and the early career faculty seminars prior to that. It's really a pleasure to have Doug Smith speak to us today. Dr. Smith is, as you know, is someone that gets a lot of invitations. Appreciate the time to join us. He has done that over the years. He's spoken to classes here on campus. He's joined MSU field trips out in the park. He provides lots of graduate students from MSU. So we much appreciate that citizenship. Doug actually was the project director for the wolf reintroduction and restoration project that started, I think, and he's been with Yellowstone National Park prior to that and ever since, a total of 20 years. He retired last year. Led the wolf program throughout, but also the bird program, health program. Way back when, Doug was did a bachelor's degree at University of Idaho, and master's at Michigan Technical University, and a PhD at Reno. He's really widely published in terms of peer review literature, but also in terms of books. Some 5 in total on birds and wolves in particular. They are very widely read and very widely cited. I guess I really appreciate Doug in being really open to helping a master's student from the department, Lisa Burrill, who was working with me, interested in looking at bird communities in the Yellowstone Northern Range. This was in the year 2000, just as the woody vegetation was starting to regrow. And she was able to document change in willow communities, presumably under the influence of trophic cascades driven by wolves, also possibly under climate change. And then look at basically the return of riparian woodland dependent bird species into that system. Doug was really instrumental in helping that project go forward. Well, again, thanks, Doug, and look forward to your comments. Thank you.
The introduction, it's always hard to stand and listen to somebody talk about you for a while, so I survived that. It's great to be here. Obviously, I worked all those years that he said in the park and retired, so live in Bozeman. So this is a great venue and easy talk to give, I think. So happy to be here. Know many of you. That's always nerve-wracking. But communicating with Madison on this for a couple months or so, I got the kind of objective of the talk is a little bit of perspective. And my perspective is government, federal government. I was a National Park Service employee in Yellowstone for 28 years. I worked on the other side of the Park Service for 16 years prior to that, mostly in the Upper Lake States, Isle Royale, Grand Portage, Apostle Islands, Voyageurs National Parks as a researcher. That's where I did my PhD research on beavers. And I also worked on and off for the wolf moose study on Isle Royale, which is a fairly notable wolf study as well. Longest running study of a carnivore in the world, actually, been continuously running since 1958. So all of that is what gave me the title, mostly because wolves will teach you a lot about human nature and controversy and, problem solving. And so Paul Cross, your previous speaker, is a friend and colleague, or former colleague, I guess, since I retired a year ago. And I know exactly what his talk was like. So this is probably not going to be that exact same thing. It's going to be fewer data slides. I'm not talking about, well, CWD may rival wolves for controversy. CWD could help solve some, wolves could help solve some CWD problems. I doubt that we'll ever get to that point. So I'll just leave that out for now. But I'm going to, this is a rough outline for my talk. And as Andy said, I kind of backed into birds. I'm a lifelong bird enthusiast, I guess you could say. And there was a retirement in 2008. This is federal government stuff. Everything revolves around budgets. Everything revolves around politics and bureaucracy. And the bird program person retired, and there was discussion of not filling that program. And I piped up foolishly and said, you can't have the mother park not have a bird program. So a couple weeks later, I got that. And so 14 years, I was program lead on the bird program. And at the same time, I was officially given elk, although I did a lot with elk before, because elk in Yellowstone are the primary prey of wolves. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So what I'm going to do is probably go with speed. And, I have one slide at the end, which is kind of my punchline. I didn't think there'd be this many faculty in here, but I was trying to give a talk of uplifting nature for students. So, give ideas on what I went through and what helped me. And so I think my point number 4 here, the faculty in the room that know me know that most of what I've achieved is just through doggedness and perseverance. So if you ever have a bad day, just stick with it. And I actually learned that from beavers, because nothing works harder and stays with it more than a beaver. And I spent a lot of time studying them as well, and that's what they gave me. The other thing I'll say right at the beginning, because I think I'm going to be erratic in my slide selection, is both working on Isle Royale with wolves and in Yellowstone with wolves, and then later birds. I believe I read in the Journal of Wildlife Management someplace that 80% of wildlife studies are 3 to 5 years. And the value of long-term study, I think, is oftentimes underappreciated. And, the 3 to 5 year study and that's roughly the length of a graduate student career. And I think that what a 3 to 5 year study does is get a lot. And that's still the bread and butter, in my view, of a lot of science. However, it takes that long-term perspective, get kind of underneath the system and see how the variability smooths out or doesn't smooth out, the return to the mean or constant variability or not, and then how one thing can lead to another in an unexpected way. And a lot of that deals with the sticking with it is sometimes you get surprised just because you're there taking notes. So anyway, that's my intro. And hopefully this will once go to the, so wolves, I'll start with wolves because that's what most people kind of associate me with for good or bad. But I had worked with wolves a number of years in Isle Royale. I'm not going to talk about that a lot, but what I learned from that was kind of long-term research, but as importantly, a functioning ecosystem. And a lot of North American ecosystems are top-down driven. Predators eat prey, prey eat vegetation. There's a lot of structuring that goes on from that. Maybe other places, like maybe African systems, are more bottom up. Plants feed the ungulates, ungulates feed the predators really aren't regulating the prey as much. North American systems seem to be strongly kind of top down, more temperate, so less productive. And so Yellowstone National Park, the world's first national park, isn't as concerned about that as they are policy, which is, we're the only land management agency in the country that has a mission of preservation, which means no use. Conservation's wise use, sustainable use. That's very different, and that creates a lot of friction historically. Montana State has led on some of that controversy because as soon as you hit the boundary, it's state and it's conservation. And so those two management objectives clash. But the park, it's not fully a functioning ecosystem until you have your top predators. And they did away with the top predators early on. I'm hoping I can click it. And so this is just a philosophical slide to say, the two objectives of the U.S. National Park System are visitor enjoyment and restoring and protecting natural systems. And so the idea here for wolf recovery was, how can you have a natural system if you don't have all of the original players in place? And we all know that you can't do that for most parks because they're postage stamps, they're too small. And Yellowstone is too, it's too small. But part of the GYE, it might be big enough to have things like carnivore recovery. And so wolves were early on the list, but I like to look at this philosophically and think, you don't hit that mission of intact ecosystem, wildland, whatever, wilderness, unless you have all the players. So that's what the park was shooting for. But they did a lot of shooting of predators prior to that. This is a photo from the 1930s, Soda Butte Valley, which is near Lamar Valley. And this is pretty much the attitude for predators at park establishment all the way through the 1930s. In fact, James Pritchard's in the room. He wrote about this evolution thinking, and the whole way through in his book is about restoring Yellowstone's natural conditions. And it's all about what should the philosophy of the Park Service be in terms of natural conditions. And it was astonishing to me how little they mentioned predators the whole way through in terms of what are we going to manage and do in Yellowstone. And this is why. So wolves themselves, even separate from Yellowstone, have had a big problem. This problem continues today in the state of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, now Colorado. Wherever they show up, it's the same old story. It's the same song, second verse. Wolves create problems. So the age-old solution to living with wolves is to kill them. And they're very resilient to killing, at least from a populational standpoint. But what not has been as well studied is their social dynamics. And I won't be able to say a lot about that, but literally you get the wrong wolf and the whole pack can crumble. And we published a paper on that last year. We looked at persistence of packs that suffered human-caused mortality a year after they lost it. And they always do, a lot of them make it. Sometimes they don't. The key is pack size. So that social structure has a lot to do with it. But anyways, this is an age-old problem for wolves. And it's an age-old problem because you have guys like Teddy Roosevelt, our conservation president, who called wolves the beast of waste and desolation. And he is the conservation president. I mean, he argued with John Muir after visiting Yellowstone in 1904 in Yosemite about not knowing the song of a hermit thrush. I'm not sure we've had a president for a couple of decades that can identify a mammal from a bird, let alone tell, John Muir, you got a hermit thrush. Incorrect. So he was a great naturalist and he loved golden eagles. And I'll get to that in a minute. In fact, we have records in the archives of notes he took on where peregrine falcons were in the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone. And so, but when you got this going on, it's a cultural bias against wolves. However, real quickly, and I do have to move quickly through the whole talk, I met his great-grandson and his son. So his great-grandson and great-great-grandson in Yellowstone, they came. And I spent an afternoon with them in my office, struggling sometimes to talk, chit-chat, that was tough. But I said I had to ask him, would, Teddy say that nowadays? And he said no. I think he would have, his thinking would have evolved. So That's at least hopeful. And that's, I think, the problem wolves have now is how much do people's thinkings evolve? Like, there you go. This made me a little nervous because this came out when I was doing wolf recovery in the 90s. But this is, wolves. I just did an interview for Mountain Journal this morning about wolf recovery in Colorado. And I said, we know a ton about wolves. Really, the future is social science, people, this kind of stuff. This is a photo a friend of mine gave me. He was actually a crane biologist. And he knew the guy who did this wolf control in the Northwest Territories in the 1960s. And he gave me this photo. And these are aerial poisoning campaigns. And this is Keewatin District of Northwest Territories. They throw poisons out of airplanes. Wolves eat them, everything eats them. They come back, they're frozen, they pick them up, they stick them in the snow like cordwood. So wolves hit their lowest ebb in the North American 1950s. They were pretty much their removal efforts early 20th century, so that's their low ebb. And they were assumed to be a wilderness creature, which they're not. They can live right alongside humans very well, but they were assumed to be a wilderness creature because the only places they were left from these extermination campaigns were the very most remote regions, primarily northern Canada and Alaska, but there was a small population in northern Minnesota. That was it for the lower 48. And this is why. I didn't bring, this is Montana ranching is king. I don't want to get into that a whole bunch, but everywhere wolves are, this is what they do. They kill. But all ecosystems are built on something eating something else. We can get into why that is. Maybe it's unfortunate, how the world works, all that kind of stuff, but pretty much everything eats something else. But wolves seem to get most of the attention and the lions share of the blame. So you have to, if you work with wolves, I would argue all predators, but it seems wolves are in their own special category. You got to confront this. If you're going to go out, and a lot of my job over the years was going out and talking to people. They don't care about science a lot of times, but you're going to have to confront them and talk to them about, wolves kill. And occasionally they will impact your population, and other times they won't. A friend of mine killed over 850 wolves in the Yukon Territory over an 18-year period, radio collared 350, to see if wolf control would increase your moose, doe, sheep, or caribou populations. And if wolves, and usually bears, if predation is your limiting factor, then killing predators works. If it's not your limiting factor, like the Southwest Yukon, that gets a lot of maritime influence of snow off the ocean, killing wolves or bears does nothing. And the other thing he pointed out is you gotta kill predators forever to keep that effect going because it's very ephemeral. So it becomes a social issue as much as a biological issue. So I got to keep the pace up. We want to get to birds. This was original wolf range. The canid body form, the canid life history is very successful. They go back 40 million years. Wolves in their current form only go back about 1 million, and they evolved in North America, and they went to Eurasia, and then they came back. I forget how many hundreds of thousands of years ago, but they started North America, Eurasia, came back, and it was kind of 3 waves of settlement. Wolf taxonomy is a mess. I don't have time to get into it. There's 5 subspecies, but Dave Meach, who's the top wolf biologist in the world, doesn't even think the subspecies concept applies to wolves. But my reason for telling you this is that doesn't mean there's no canid here. That's just a different canid. They call it red wolf, Canis rufus, that a lot of people think, evolved in the New World and stayed here and didn't do this Beringia exchange, so to speak. But they're a very successful body type and predator. So all of North America was filled with some type of medium to large size canid. And then this is the result of that killing I talked about. I've got Yellowstone in a rectangle there, but this is pretty much, and the lower part of that yellow they were still much reduced. And so really this is the frontier. And, wolf recovery in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem did not occur because we grew more wolf habitat. And it's some of the work that Andy Hansen's done. I think I have a slide here that's coming up. Yikes, think you gave me permission for that slide. It's at the end. You know, the big issue for the GYE is what's the future like? And talking with the superintendent at Yellowstone, I actually had an argument with him the other night over drinks, so I don't remember all of it. But, you know, I view the future of the GYE as somewhat, you know, worrisome. What like development and human population, and some papers published by Andy, don't bode well. The superintendent of Yellowstone, Cam Shelley, shot back at me and said 70% public land. It's mostly protected. That's not going to change. You can't ruin that. You know, so I guess, well, hey, Cam, that other 30%, maybe we can talk about what happens if you lose that? What happens if you get human population density increasing, as has been documented, development, ranchettes, which have horses and goats, and you know, if that wolf kills that goat, they're going to want wildlife service to come in and kill that wolf back. So, you know, what's the future? Is it bright or is it dim? Now, in terms of this 70-30, but a lot of it is these attitudes. So I'm having trouble with it. I was hoping I could push, but it's stuck. So this is GYE, some will call it, and I wish I could find a reference for that. I haven't taken a lot of time to get this, but a lot of people refer this as the most intact temperate zone ecosystem in the world. Underlying temperate, tropics, Arctic probably has bigger, but this, you know, most of the people live mid-latitudes. This is mid-latitude, and it's pretty big, 18, 22 million acres, depending on who you read, size of Connecticut. And it's the Yellowstone Park's at its core, but it's also got Grand Teton and quite a complex of Forest Service land. So when wolves were listed as an endangered species in 1974, right away, people are thinking GYE. But the park didn't have a history so much. James Pritchard's here. I didn't know he was going to come. I wouldn't have put these slides in. He can explain this better. The park didn't have a history of, you know, protecting natural systems. 1872 was when the park was established. It was a howling wilderness then. Who wanted to come to a park to experience wilderness environmental values? You know, you wanted to come have a good time. And the predators had to go, and we got them, not just the wolves, but the cougars. I don't have time to talk about cougars, but they are a more effective predator than wolves. Every cougar biologist as a hobby that I meet, I ask them success rate on cougar kills, and I have yet to meet one that says under 50%. And Morris Hornacher, the grand old man of all of it, told me like 80%. Wolves are terrible hunters compared to that. Their success rate hunting elk runs between 5 to 15%. That means they're roughly failing 80% of the time. Cougars are succeeding, let's just average it out, a majority of the time. I mean, they know what they're going to kill before they try and kill it, and they usually have it figured out. Wolves just get out in the open and they sift through everything and go, let me see what you got. And very different, but we got rid of all the predators. And so now we had this kind of situation. And so roughly, and this will depend on who you read. I'm sure James has got a number on it. Doug Houston's got a number on it. But from roughly 1923 to 1968, ironically, because of the loss of predators, the elk population started to grow. And the major debate was, what is that doing to the landscape? And a range management mindset was dominating the Park Service then. And so they started moving elk. Roughly 70,000 were taken out during that time period. And they were either killed by rangers in the park like this, they were shipped across the entire Western United States, most Canadian provinces, Mexico, to repopulate after market hunting did in most of the elk. One of my favorite things to say, I don't have time to get into this story, but everyone talks about this is the wrong wolf you released in Yellowstone. It's the Canadian wolf, and that wasn't the wolf that was here. I like to say, well, they've been eating Yellowstone elk ever since we repopulated Alberta and British Columbia with Yellowstone elk. So they've already met. So this idea that these wolves are bigger and they're doing the elk in, they've already been talking to each other in Canada. Or Montana hunters shot them at the park line. And that was where Montana State, there's some very famous people at Montana State and U of M who criticized the park for that. I ended up meeting those people at Al Harmada's house later in life, and I was like, this guy's a really nice guy. I didn't hear great stories about him working in the park, but I don't see why he was such a critic and everybody was wary of him. So at any rate, so that's kind of the history. And so this is, I guess, from the perspective of me giving this talk and working with Madison, okay, so that's the intro. I was hired from Royal to do the wolf introduction here. I wanted to give a little perspective of just, I'm trying to keep my nose to the grindstone doing science. You can't get there a lot of times with wolves. You get this, it's going on in Colorado now. Here's another one. Misinformation is, I'm not saying wolves are easy to live with, but misinformation is rampant and never goes away. Colorado's going through it right now. But you also get this side too. You're getting both. And everybody with wolves seems to be in one of those two camps. And I worked with some Alaskan wolf biologists in the 80s. Bill Gasway is the most notable one. He also was a pioneer on what does killing wolves do to moose populations. And it's from him and a couple others in Alaska, trying to live in the middle with wolves is a good place to be, but a really hard place to be because you're constantly getting ripped to the sides. So I don't know if I can offer advice on how to deal with that. So it got decided to do. Wolves are reintroduced. This is the most famous picture of wolf recovery, including Idaho. No offense against Idaho, because there was a sister project going on at the same time. But this is the Secretary of the Interior and the first female director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service carrying that first wolf in. Very famous. These two cowboys were solidly anti-wolf. That's Wally Wines and Bob Blackwell. Wally grew up in Elko, Nevada. Bob grew up in Montana. And it was an eye-opener for me, coming from the Lake States, working with wolves, coming to Montana and getting to know these dyed-in-the-wool cowboy wolf haters. And it was good because we began having conversations and we began learning about each other's viewpoint. And I think that's one of the small pieces of advice I can talk about is first making friends. And fortunately, I grew up horseback riding, so I could immediately be friends with Bob and Wally. And then you can start to make inroads because they won't trust you or they won't listen to you unless there's a level of trust. It was a big deal. A lot of people think, I was personally thinking that this wolf reintroduction, the right thing to do was because ethically, ecologically and policy-wise, that was the reason we did it. But a lot of people, this is John Potter, who came back to the park every single year to pray for the wolves, said the single most important reason to reintroduce wolves is for spiritual, cultural reasons, not ecological or policy. So every time I see him, he hands me a pack of cigarettes, the native, whatever that, I don't smoke, but he still hands them to me. So this is wolf number 7 coming into the park in a shipping crate. She wanted to start the Leopold pack. We named that pack after Aldo Leopold because he recommended wolf recovery to Yellowstone in 1944. And so this was the first naturally forming wolf pack in Yellowstone's new wolf era. So my favorite tagline for this slide is, would you like to know what she's thinking? So this kind of culminated carnivore recovery in Yellowstone. Bears were never eliminated, but they were at low population size. Cougars were eliminated and came back on their own. So this is restoring the carnivore suite after being eliminated. And that's good news for parks because rarely do you restore something at that kind of level. And so wolves were back. And all the controversy, but Yellowstone was a beachhead. It was a core area where wolves could exist, do well, and not have conflict. And so I think that's going to be very different than Colorado, Oregon, Washington. Where's your beachhead? Where's your core area where the wolf population can thrive without conflict? But elk is the flashpoint, probably more than deer. Elk are iconic in the West, and wolves, wherever they go, that's arguably their ideal prey. They have a mixed strategy of fleeing and standing their ground. When you get bigger than elk, bison, moose, they stand their ground. Wolves hate that. They have lower success rates against them. When you're below the size of an elk, you flee. You try and outrun the predator. Elk are at that mid size, so in terms of cost benefit, they're slightly easier to kill, and you get more out of it when you do kill one. So the other thing we did, and I think this was, sometimes the most important things in life are the simplest. And one thing I did and made a decision on it was we're going to mark a lot of animals. And a lot of people in national parks do not like that. I have some video here coming up. I gotta pick my pace up to get to the birds, showing how that's done with a helicopter. But parks are you're not supposed to harass wildlife. And we're chasing wolves around the helicopter. We collared over 500 individuals, over 600 captures. And one reason I made that decision was all the wolves came with radio collars. That's a rare opportunity. So I was schooled by the old guard in the wolf world, and a big problem was getting enough collars out there to know what's going on. You know, you go to Alaska, you got a wolf population and not one of them's collared. You're starting from scratch. You need airplane pilots that can track them in the snow, and then you can get on them and trap them, or get on them and dart them. I was schooled on that stuff. I had the flip situation. Every one of them's marked. And so throughout my whole career, I was like, don't lose that edge. So you had to keep packs in each collar. I asked 3 times to let go of the trap, got denied all 3 times. IBGSC grizzly folks weighed in on that. If you accidentally catch a grizzly bear in a trap and you don't have a truck to check them with, most trapping in Montana, you have hard-sided vehicles to get to them. So if you have trouble with a bear, you have a truck. We would have been doing it off of trails. So it was all helicopter darting. So that means if you lose collars in a pack, really, really hard to find them when you got the helicopter sitting in Gardner to get on them again. So this is what we had to do. So over 600 captures. This is a 1.5-minute video of helicopter darting. There's some opportunities. So there's a Hollywood company making a documentary on wolves. They just did one on Arnold Schwarzenegger. The next one's on Hart. They got to finish this one first. Kind of waiting for that. Are you feeling 1 now and 2 week collar? So this is very difficult to do because we got permission. I won't go through the story, to have another helicopter flying above the airplane. To catch wolves from a helicopter, you have to have a spotter plane go out first, find them, direct you in on where the wolves are, and then have a helicopter below darting them. The film company paid for a second helicopter to film everything from above. So this has never been done before anywhere, let alone national park. We'll get into what the process of that was. I'm not really a fan of this. I asked them not to put in the documentary, but I'm firing cracker shells there to move the wolves out of the trees. That's an exploding shotgun shell that goes off in the air above them, because this is very forested. This is Pelican Valley. And if they're in the trees, you can't dart them. So I had to get them out of the trees. That's the dart gun. So I'm old school. I almost never wear gloves ever. It's probably bad. Had to for the film crew. Dan Taylor. Eric Cassidy there too. 42. That's key. Get disease and genetic information. So that might be as important as putting the collar on. Okay, I think we're done. Oh, this is gonna be a short day. It is. That was one skill I did not have coming from the Lake States. It's all legal trapping. So I had to learn how to do it. I went to Alaska. I had friends there, like I mentioned, who taught me how to do it. My first starting was Denali National Park. The joke was, our wolves aren't valuable. Can't you learn on your own wolves? In Alaska, you know, wolf's a 4-letter word, so that, yeah, they probably are less valuable. Anyways, this is in our book. Our book came out right during COVID. And this is an improper slide to show because it's too noisy for you to absorb, so you can study it in the book. But this just shows kind of, and I'm running out of time. I don't have time to get into kind of the territoriality of wolves and how they use the park. This is the wolf population. We've got some great, you know, Jay Rotella teaches population ecology here. I should probably retake the class. I took it 40 years ago at University of Idaho. But I just eyeballed this. Jay's gonna get mad at this. And I just eyeballed this and said, this is phase one, because there's a lot of population fluctuations, and this is phase two, and it's pretty much stable. And this is a colonizing wolf population, and this is a saturated wolf population. And if you know which phase your wolf population is in, you will know a lot about the wolves. You'll know a lot about pack composition, pack size, dispersal, number of age classes in the pack, what percentage of the population is pups. High percentage of the population is pups here, low here. These wolves deal much better with hunting pressure, compensatory mortality. Most of the mortality here is additive. It's really hard to know what phase of the wolf population you're in, but if you know you're colonizing or saturated, that gives you a head start. I gotta say this because this guy was from Bozeman. This is Roger Stradley, Gallatin Flying Service, out there in Belgrade. I got several thousand hours in the back of the plane with that guy right there. Started flying out of Belgrade in 1960. He is the man. 2016 May issue of National Geographic was entirely devoted to Yellowstone, and a photographer put this camera on the struts. Raj, I flew this illegally. All you have to do to be a pilot for this kind of plane is pass your physical. He did not pass it. So I was not allowed to fly into the park because National Geographic was going to use this as a centerfold in their magazine, but they wanted snow on the bottom. And their photo editor told me, Doug, we need perfect for National Geographic. Ain't no snow, but I took 800 pictures of me and Raj flying around Paradise Valley, and they didn't use it. But I never really calculated, but I probably have 5,000 to 6,000 hours sitting in the back of that plane with that guy right there. Unfortunately, he died a little over a year ago, and that's his dad and brother. I also threw his brother, Dave. Roger's a lot smoother than Dave, but that was Jim, their dad. This is the Belgrade Airport out there, and they were a flying family. Jim taught World War II flying. He was a flight instructor for World War II pilots. They were great guys. I miss all of them. Well, I never knew Jim, but Roger for sure, and Dave too. So here's that hunt sequence, and then I got to move on. But this is that kill shot I showed you at the beginning. This is the whole thing, and this is the stuff that you did with Raj. You got a good pilot. This is not a helicopter. Everybody thinks we take these photos out of a helicopter. This is a pilot circling, keeping the wolves, the strut out of the camera view, and keeping the action on the circle so you can continuously see it. So here's a hunt sequence that I got because of that great piloting. So this is a terrain trap. Wolves almost always are killing vulnerable animals, and they end up, this is a calf they target, but there's places that occur on the landscape that will favor wolves over the prey. And this was a pinch point. The Yellowstone River dropped off right here, so there's a cliff, and the forest came out here, and there was a thin alleyway between the cliff and the forest, and all the elk, they did not want to run through the forest because that would trip them up. That would be difficult. They're all funneling through this pinch point, and the wolves are right on their tail, and they were going after who was ever in the rear, and who was in the rear was a calf. And so this is that sequence, again, keeping that plane all right there. And because it's a calf, that wolf in the front's giving it a bear hug. They won't do that with a cow elk or a bull elk, although they will grab the neck a lot with a cow elk, but they're not going to bear hug it like that. And there's the photo I showed you. And then there's the end. And this is what everybody hates. And that's the controversy. And you got to keep your cool dealing with it. So very quickly, arguably the greatest American writer of all time, Mark Twain, summarized wolf biology really good, really well. Supposing is good. That's all of wolf biology. Everybody thinks they know about wolves. And this is what you guys are doing. Finding out is basically data. And that's all the field of wolf ecology right there. Mark Twain didn't know it. And so here's the Northern Yellowstone elk population. I got to really go fast. Andy told me to have time for questions. But this is through that period of control. And these are not scientifically corrected. They will probably ask that question after. These are just raw counts. FWP likes using the raw count. This was an interagency count. You can see we had the misfortune of reintroducing wolves right here. So at an all-time high. So the only thing the population can do is go down, and everybody blames this on wolves. And this population size is probably more aligned with long-term National Park Service objectives of ecological integrity than making Yellowstone an elk farm. Because Yellowstone is primarily an elk summering area, and they come out in the winter, right during the hunting season. And many people like Yellowstone functioning as an elk farm. Throw them in the summer, they come out and hunt them at the boundary. But this is probably more aligned with National Park Service objectives and policy. Try explaining that to most Americans. Americans are built psychologically on more is better. 100%. Consumer culture. I got to put this in here. This is state data. Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, elk population, right wolves introduced 2018 in all cases, and this is harvest rate. I got to go fast. In all cases, the populations are equal or greater. And so as I read the newspaper, hear the controversy about wolves doing it in elk, there's a county in Montana suing FWP for too many elk. I find this ironic. Colorado has the largest elk and deer herd in the Western United States, where wolves just got reintroduced in late 2023. And I threw this in just because I said beavers, it's the only time I've ever seen a beaver kill from the air. And the pilot, this is a different pilot, we buzzed that wolf numerous times. I thought the thing was dead. And it never lifted its head, not once, no matter how hard we strafed it. I know it's National Park, again, shouldn't have done that, but the next day the wolf wasn't there. So it didn't die, but it just was really asleep, I guess. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but you know, if you think that the controversy over wolf reintroduction, to have it or not, is bad for the public, wait till you get scientists in a debate. I mean, that it can look like child's play. And the biggest scientific debate in Yellowstone is what has been the impact of carnivore recovery. Most people forget to say carnivore recovery. They say wolf recovery. But remember, I talked about cougars as well. They were gone, they came back, and bear populations increased. So you have a fully restored carnivore community. What is the impact of that on, and Andy mentioned Lisa Brill was working on some of this. That's actually Lisa Brill right there. And she worked in the bird program for a number of years, but it gets into the grazing versus browsing debate, and a paper just came out, Tom Hobbs led on it, in Ecological Monographs, again, opening a whole other can of worms of have willow and aspen come back and what's it due to. And so I don't have time to get into that. That is a talk on its own, but beavers have increased. I did 17 beaver surveys in my career in Yellowstone as well, just counting them, not doing research. Mostly powered by this willow recovery, which Tom's paper says didn't happen. This is Crystal Creek, which is really close to the road. This beaver colony has actually moved upstream a little bit ways into Aspen, but this is the effect of having beavers back. They changed the geomorphology, they changed the water regime. You get more willow, you get more birds. That's a Wilson's warbler. And down here, willow flycatcher, willow obligates, not necessarily willow obligate, but does really well in willow. The other one's a yellowthroat. They're more generalist, but they do well in willow too. So this increase in willow has really impacted other things. And everybody asks, well, what does it impact? You know, that's a limitation on the number of studies you can do. You know, not everything can be done. So we always say birds and beavers and things like that, but there's a whole host of things that are probably impacted. Last little bit about wolves. Big debate, this is social science. To have wolves, do you have to kill them? So there's this big, you know, wolves were held on the endangered species list for 10 years after they reached numerical recovery levels. And a lot of people think public opinion flipped against wolves because we were at the numbers the recovery plan stated, they still weren't delisted. And that was because of lawsuits over the management plans. But they said it turned public opinion against them because, in short, and this is big social science, I can't get into it, but people feel better if you can shoot and kill them. Or sure, livestock people, but even hunters. You're out hunting and you don't get an elk that year and you see a wolf and you can't shoot it, you're really upset. If you see a wolf and you can shoot it, you feel better. So social tolerance goes up. And there's data on both sides. Scandinavia leads on this. They thought that that was true for about 20 years, and now they're reversing field on it, saying it's not true. And what they're measuring is when killing wolves is hard, poaching goes up. When killing wolves is easy, poaching goes down, kind of a yin and yang. And they're finding that is not necessarily true. This is Montana. This is Wyoming. Wyoming's slightly different. In 88% of the state, wolves are a predator. But here I am. This is one of my last duties in Yellowstone. I'm at the state capitol testifying about how many wolves to shoot outside of Yellowstone. So this is the future of wolves. And the other thing I did, and my bosses, some of you know my bosses, so I better not say too much, used to say that I did this just because I liked riding horses in the mountains every fall. That is true. But some of the rangers I interacted with literally said to me, Doug, they don't care about your peer-reviewed pups. They don't care about your TV interviews. They don't care about your popular articles. You got to take the message to them. And so pretty much, if not every year, but every other year, I would ride, this is Shoshone National Forest. I would ride into outfitter camps who were hunting elk as a living and talk to outfitters. And over the stage of my career, the feedback I got on that was one of the better things I did. And standing in front of a group like you, I would think you would look at my publication record over that. But I've gotten more feedback that this did more for wolf conservation than that. So that's just something to think about and store away, because I know all of you will go on to publish widely and frequently. But here I was working for a government agency, and this is what I got the best feedback for. Okay, gotta go fast. Birds. And I didn't think that I would take that long for the wolves. This is Dave Haynes. And this is the first golden eagle ever caught in Yellowstone's history. And we started a golden eagle study. Wyoming is the golden eagle state. It probably has more golden eagles than any other state. And Dave caught this one. And this bird flew around Paradise Valley during the hunting season, came back to the park, and died of lead poisoning. And so this is a huge issue for many birds, especially golden eagles, in the West, because they scavenge carcasses a lot. They ingest lead from lead bullets. It's an easily solved problem. You can sight in with lead, but if you shoot with copper, you can avoid this problem. And copper bullets are 99% retention, and they're not toxic. So easy solution, but you're taking out gun culture. So no one wants to touch it. And it's great to have hunters be conservationists. That's Teddy Roosevelt. But shooting the right kind of bullet, which is slightly more expensive, is a big push. And so I don't have a lot of time to get into that either. And the problem here, this is too much to read because I got to go fast. The issue, what makes golden eagles relate to everything I just said, was we have high density golden eagles in northern Yellowstone, 21 territories on the northern range, but extraordinarily low productivity. There's 2 studies going on outside the park, Livingston and Cody area, that have double to triple the productivity that we have in the park. So this is a mismatch. High density, low productivity. Why? We don't know, but they're a long-lived bird, 20, 30 years. Before carnivore recovery, there was a winter die-off of elk every year in the hundreds of thousands, right when golden eagles were nesting. And they were eating those dead elk, and that might have fueled small territory size, high density. All that's gone now with carnivore recovery. We don't have the winter carcasses in the end of the winter. And so the golden eagles don't have that same food source, but their density is still high. So we're kind of calling this the legacy of elk past. I got to go fast. This is the location of those territories. We put a camera up, Dave did, I should say, on one of these. That's a coyote pup. I mean, golden, I just spent a lot of time talking about wolves. Golden eagles make wolves look like slouches in terms of predators. If it's this big, and sometimes even bigger, a golden eagle thinks they can kill it. I mean, this bird will kill anything. That's their mindset. If you're, I've handled a few, both with Dave and Al Hermana, and the look to their eye is, yeah, they absolutely have the look of, I can kill anything. And they're like, if they get their talons into you, you're going to the hospital, if we can get them out. But that's a coyote pup. This is another, some of the things, that's the nestling, but that's a prairie falcon in there. This is remains of a prairie falcon, and they eat a lot of ground squirrels. This is bald eagle's totally different story in Yellowstone, doing really poorly in Yellowstone Lake because of loss of cutthroat. This is on Slough Creek. This is mid-March, but they're doing well throughout the rest of the park. Don't have time to get into them. That was Al Armada's work in the 80s, mostly. We did bird mist netting. Again, got to go fast. This has never been done before in Yellowstone until about 10 years ago, yellow warbler. And this is breeding bird surveys showing major ecological perturbations, fire, carnivore recovery, and the three routes we have, and kind of a long-term decline. And again, I gotta keep going. Swans. Jay Rotel's in the room. Evan Shields isn't. He's a former grad student in your department, worked on swans in Yellowstone, but they're iconic in Yellowstone because Yellowstone and Red Rock Lakes were the last places trumpeter swans existed in the lower 48. Red Rocks was actually made a wildlife refuge in 1935 for swans. There was another population in Alberta and Alaska, but they weren't known about till the 1950s. So 30s, 40s, and 50s, swans were doing well in Yellowstone, long-term decline. Evan and others, that was partly, and Jay advised him, was part of that project. Here's the population graph. Maybe I took this from Evan even. This is cygnet production. You can see middle part of the century, how they're doing well. This is total white birds. Jay reminded me often, they're easy to count, man. It's a white bird on black water. Come on, you can't get this off. But this is our decline. Right here, we started reintroducing swans. Very controversial. We had a workshop in 2011 here in Bozeman, swan experts from all over North America. They couldn't agree on why they declined, and they couldn't agree on if we should intervene or not. Because a lot of people go, well, don't do anything until you know what happens. This is a bald eagle trying its wings in a tree after killing this cygnet. And so we learned it was an interaction between human disturbance, pushing the swans away from their cover on shore, out into open water where the golden eagles would kill them. And they lost their cutthroat trout food supply. So there's an interaction between cutthroat trout levels on the lake and eagle predation, and they killed a loon too, right, Arcata, on nest?
Yellowstone Lake.
Yeah. Anyways, this is swan reintroduction. Loons. Arcata Levitt's in the room. I didn't know she was going to be here. She ran the loon program for how many years? Okay. Well, she knows a lot about loons, so I think she's here for another reason. Anyways, this is Yellowstone is the most isolated and further south common loon breeding population in North America. And so we intensified a study on them in 2012, learned, and one geolocator worked. This bird's going off the Baja Peninsula in the winter. That was not known. But what we learned very quickly was gill netting kills several birds a year. Actually, Arcata went through all the data to find out how many birds a year. We think it would be more if we weren't coordinating with the fish program. And I think she might not think as much. There's more birds bumped off of nests by people that lead to nest failure. And these were two things the park did not know prior to the study. So this could be impacting this very small and isolated population, which roughly is 60% in the park, roughly 25 territorial pairs. And if they blink out, they're very poor colonizers. The closest loon population is 300 miles in northwest Montana. So a very hard thing to restore. And none of this was really known in the park. I got a blast. This is Clark's Nutcrackers. I won't talk much about them because the reason I have it in the program is they're tied to whitebark pine. And whitebark pine just got listed as a threatened species. And whitebark pine is heavily and widely studied, not so much the bird. So we began a program in the park, putting transmitters on them to look at population size and how are they dealing with variable whitebark pine crops. So I'm summarizing this quickly. This is a remote camera coming in, taking a picture of a Clark's Nutcracker caching, which is hard to get on film. And then we also, John Marsloff, who just retired from University of Washington, who's now here in Bozeman, retired here, great guy, knows a ton about corvids. Radio tagged over 100 ravens with Matthias Loretto from Max Planck Institute in Germany, although Matthias has moved on to another job. And the question was, how much do ravens rely on wolves? You know, they're called wolf birds. I don't have time, I'm running out of time. Andy said I have questions, but a raven, some days I was down in the park yesterday. I was looking at a raven. When I look at them and they're just kind of walking around, I get the feeling that they're smarter than me. John says their average intelligence is like a 7-year-old. I get the feeling that the raven's the smarter one of the two of us. And basically the answer to his study, and he gave a great talk the other night at the Ellen, ravens do whatever they need to do. I mean, they'll go to garbage, they'll follow wolves, they'll fly to Idaho Falls, they'll fly to Alberta. And oddly, we had one go to Red Lodge, flying back, and immediately take a beeline, I forget how many kilometers. It's on a flight path like this. We just did a bird book, and I asked John, what are the raven highways? So we have a map in the book showing these raven highways. They're on these raven highways flying around the park, and all of a sudden one of them departs from it and goes straight for a wolf kill. I didn't know it was there. You know, they're not smelling, but boom, they do whatever they need to do. Anyways, this is the ravens is what I want to show you. And this is a remote camera. The wolves killed a bison right in front of this remote camera. You know, talk about clean living. That was pure luck. But the ravens there, just sitting there looking at you. Anyway, I think this is Andy's map. So am I worried about the future? Yes. This is all the roads in the GYE, just roads. So everyone says, my colleagues who I did wolf reintroduction with, you're a worrier, Doug. We won. 50 years ago, no one would have dreamed of having wolves back on the landscape. Now there's 1,100 in Montana. Who would have thought that would happen? The death of wolves is access. There's lots of published papers on that. That looks like pretty good access to me. This is the other thing that worries me. I talked about human attitudes. This came off Facebook. One of those guys attended a talk that I gave after this picture of pig about this big. And I didn't finish my talk because he was harassing me the whole way through. But this is human attitudes. Neither of these two things are looking better. Even though my colleagues, by the way, all of us who started this wolf thing have retired by now. I was the last of the batch. Sometimes I regret that. But they're like, you worry too much. That's why I worry. So life's about compromise. Remember I said that Alaskan wolf biologist friend of mine, living in the middle ain't bad. It's super hard to do. Super hard to do. So I also spent my career, this is the end part of my talk, where I'm trying to impart wisdom, which I don't know, like I said, ravens are smarter than me. They might have more. I have spent my life, Jay's done better at it than me, Andy too, Bach in the back, putting a number on things. That's the gold standard you guys are here for, right? Public doesn't care. They want a story. You know, if I had given this talk to you for 20 years ago, I would have had all data slides. I'm an MSU, are you kidding? Working with wolves doesn't work. Birds too. People are wired for stories. What's her story? Okay, I did this slide last night based on Madison, what she told me I'd be talking about. Perseverance is how I got through my PhD and my job. And I learned that from beavers. They never give up. You're going to be right most of the time. Most people don't go to college. You're educated. You're going to be right. But no one's going to believe you. Then what do? Deal with criticism. I just submitted another scientific paper the other day. I got back to review. I said, I'm tired of this. I don't want to do this anymore. I mean, everybody wants to take their best shot at you. And I have a semi-recognizable name in the literature. So, man, when it's an anonymous review, you're going to get hit. And, you know, you got to come up with a strategy to deal with that. Thick skin, broad shoulders, key. Working with wolves, I got criticized a lot. And time, they did surveys, this Harvard study, this 80-year longitudinal study, the generation that's coming up now, What's the most important thing to you? All of them said money. Money. No. You know, as I feel the hourglass ticking, time is your most valuable resource. So that's what I learned through my career. And a lot of people ask me, why did you retire with the gas still in the tank? Here's my answer. This is how I felt some days working for the federal government. That's a true story. Chasing my tail. And you know, a lot of people are like, couldn't you just gone to 30 instead of 28? Ask my wife about that. Anyways, that's, I didn't get to cover a lot of what I should have about wolves nor birds. And the bird book just came out. Jay's a contributor to the bird book. Evan Shields, MSU grad student. That's all I got. I hit right point. I apologize. Annie said 10 of. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.